Welcome to day number 18 of the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. Wow, guys, we already achieved quite a lot. We came a long way since day one. During the last few days, we talked a lot about very specific end-to-end workflows, and I taught you the exact techniques and modules that you can integrate into your workflows to solve certain tasks. For example, automated Google search or scraping websites. And today I want to present you 3 automations that I built for real clients, and I just want to give you a little bit background information about the entire process, how I approach these projects, what kind of projects these were, so that you get a real insight into an AI automation business. And then in the next upcoming days, we will step by step also learn how you can acquire your very first client and how you can step by step transition into an AI automation pro who sells AI automation to real businesses. So this is my goal with that challenge, to teach you not only how to build AI automations, but also teaching you how you can actually master the business side of all that. Before I present you now the 3 automations that I built for real businesses, I have another tip for you. What you learned until now about end-to-end and AI automation is already quite a lot and a good foundation, but you need to apply this. Because of that, I highly recommend you to just get your hands dirty, start building little projects, start automating things that help yourself, or just come up with ideas for example projects and then try to solve them. Because what you need is a feeling for end-to-end and AI automation. It's a little bit hard to describe, but you probably get the idea. It's one thing learning the theory, it's another thing applying that to real use cases. Because of that, I highly recommend you to not just watch the videos, but also start your own projects on the side and just try to spend as much time as possible building end-to-end workflows and automations. I can already tell you that this will pay off big because it is your own personal experience that matters in the end. All right, that's it regarding the introduction. Now we jump over to my screen and I'll present you 3 AI automations that I built for real companies. All right, the very first one I want to talk about is the recipe analyzer. I already mentioned that project earlier in the challenge, but now I want to give you the real stats, what actually happened within the project. So the goal was to automate the legality check of imported beauty products. My client is importing beauty products from China, and I had to come up with an automation that can help him with the legal part of all that. The time frame were 2 months. I received a compensation of $1,000 fixed, more on that later. The client acquisition was personal recommendation, and the infrastructure that I used to build the AI automation was end-to-end. All right, so let's have a quick overview what this recipe analyzer actually did. Everything starts with the fact that a client of mine is importing beauty products from China. And I built an AI automation that is doing a pre-check if the recipe of these beauty products is legal in the European Union. Because as you can imagine, the European Union is super strict when it comes to products that are applied to the skin and the human body. And because of that, big part of my client's work is just analyzing the recipes and the European Union rules. And my workflow helps him to check thousands of substances and all the European Union rules within a couple of minutes, instead of countless hours that he or his team have to spend. And this is of course saving my client countless hours, but not only that, it's also allowing him to import even faster because the time for checking and coming up with a decision is just reduced quite a lot. And now I want to show you how I actually did approach that project. The first step for myself was understanding the subject and the provided data I had to work with. There are so-called annex lists, which are part of the cosmetic regulation of the European Union. And in the first step, I just had to understand, okay, what is this actually all about? In which case, which list has to be checked? Because there are actually 6 of these annex lists, and all of them have to be checked against every single ingredient in the recipe. In the second step, it was all about understanding how my client normally does this process and what matters to him, getting aware of rare edge cases and how to treat them. And here we already see something that is super important and that is actually part of every automation you build. You always have to understand, okay, What is it actually that you want to automate? How is your client doing that until now? And are there any special cases that you have to take care of? Because yes, in theory, every process looks super easy and straightforward, but then when you pay attention, you see that there are little exceptions to the norm, and it is most of the time exactly these cases that make big problems in the end. So be aware of them from the very beginning. After that, I validated the concept by building a very simple check for just one annex list. Okay, so we tested it out with one list, and then we said, okay, if it works for one list, we can also further develop that to check all the other annex lists as well. After that, we had several feedback loops to adjust the check and to make sure that also the edge cases are included. And then in number 5, we expanded the workflow to check all annex lists and also the so-called Öko test list. And this is just a German thing, but it is basically just another list full of rules that apply to imported beauty products. And then when everything was done and working, I set up the entire workflow at my client's infrastructure. Normally, I already built from the very beginning on my client's infrastructure, but in that case, I just did it the other way around because it was one of my very first projects. And then, of course, I had to build the workflow also on his infrastructure. And here on the next slide, I want to show you how the final workflow looks like. You see, it is quite big, and you can imagine that it takes a while until you get such a workflow running without problems. And as you see here on the right side, everything starts here with such a pop-up form, how we already used it in the very first end-to-end workflow that we built within the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. So you see, also these pop-up forms are totally fine if your client wants to work like that. Not everyone wants a polished user interface. For many use cases, if it is an internal use, it is totally fine to just go with the N8N default pop-up form. And also here we learn another important thing. As you see, there are different colors. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different colors, and those represent the different annex lists. And this is something that I also recommend you, that you always work nice, clean and organized so that you understand what is happening where in the workflow. Because you can imagine if I deliver that and then I don't see it 1 year, and after 1 year my client asks me to change something and I just get back a huge mess, it is super hard for me to even understand my very own workflow. Because of that, always work nice, clean and organized. It makes your life so much easier. All right, that's it regarding the very first project. Now we come to the next one, the so-called deal checker. I already teased that workflow just yesterday when you learned about automated Google search and checking impressum pages of companies. And now I want to show you in more detail what this project was actually about. So the goal was to automate the search of billable office space transactions. The time frame were here just 3 weeks, so we were pretty fast with that project. The compensation here was $120 per hour, so this was already a paid project. The client acquisition was a follow-up project after a first free project, and I will teach you more about this entire process and why I also recommend to you starting with free projects in the next coming days. And the infrastructure was also N8N. This is actually the only infrastructure that I use right now because I think it is without a doubt the most powerful automation software. All right, so let's have a quick look at the exact process. Everything starts with the fact that my client has a platform for shared office spaces. He connects offices with people who search office space. And my automation checks the company's impressum if they are now registered in one of the platform's office spaces. My client sends them then an invoice for 1.2 monthly rents plus an additional 30% for not reporting the deal. And in the end, it saves my client countless hours for manually checking the impressum pages of all these people searching for office space, and it also gives him almost effortless extra money, extra revenue, because my scraper just runs 24/7 and it is super cheap. It almost costs nothing, and we just find all these deals in an automated way. We just send them out an email, please pay your commission, And that's it. And this is pretty amazing. All right. And how did I approach that from a project side? First, it was all about understanding the client's process and the provided data, because there were huge tables exported from their platform and their CRM. And in the first step, I had to understand, okay, how is the structure of the data and how can I make my AI automation take that structure in and work with it. Then in the second step, it was all about validating the general concept by building a simple check for just the people who already provided a website on the platform, because this is optional. And because of that, we started light by just checking the pages of people who actually provided a website. And in the next step, we further expanded that. After that, we expanded the workflow to also search for companies that were not provided by the user by an automated Google search. We searched the name plus address, and by that we were able to identify the companies of these people even if they have not stated any website. And then in step number 4, it was basically about several debugging and testing rounds, mainly implementing error handlers to keep the workflow running with huge data sets. And this is of course something important that you also have to think about from the very beginning. If you set up a workflow that is supposed to run for 10 or 12 hours or even 24 hours straight, you cannot afford that this workflow is breaking down every 2 hours, because then you just lose a lot of speed, and every time you have to step in and start the workflow from scratch. And of course you lose a lot of time. Because of that, I had to implement a lot of error handlers so that whenever an error occurs, the workflow just keeps working anyway and just skips the element that made problems. But no worries, I will talk more about that, how you handle big workflows and big data later in the challenge. All right, so let's have a quick look how that workflow looks like. In the end, it was basically a combination of 2 workflows. So we had workflow 1 and we had workflow 2. And I already showed you that just yesterday when we learned a smaller version of exactly that workflow. And also here you can see that these workflows can become pretty complex. And because of that, I also worked here with colors. I kept everything nice, structured and organized, because in my opinion, this is the only way to manage the complexity of such workflows, because this can even get bigger. Maybe my client wants other features included. And if you imagine a workflow like that without colors, without nice structure, you are completely screwed, because you have no idea what you actually built. And if you build something like that, it is super easy for you and also for your client to understand, okay, what is happening where. And if all parties involved better understand the work, this is of course way better for the success of the entire project. All right, and now we come to project number 3, the report creator. This is also a real client project, and the goal here was to automate the report creation about interview candidates. So this is something I built for a headhunting agency. The time frame were here 3 to 4 weeks for the very first version of the tool. The compensation was also $120 per hour. The client acquisition was also, like the project before, a follow-up project after a first free project. And again, I will show you also in the challenge how you actually acquire your very first customers. And the infrastructure here was n8n, a Python app, a Flask app, and at that point of the challenge you know what this is, and also a user interface deployed to a domain. So you see here I applied the entire stack that I taught you in the very first example project of the challenge, the Yard Configurator. All right, so let's check out the general process. My client runs a headhunting agency, and part of it is interviewing potential candidates for certain roles. Let's say a company wants to hire a new CEO, then my client has the interviews, and during these interviews, my client uses a transcription tool, of course with the permission of the candidates, so that after the interview they have an entire text document that just stores everything that was said within the interview in text form. And I built an AI automation that uses these transcripts to write professional and complete reports about these candidates so that they can present it to other companies. And you can also imagine here how much time this saves my client and how much this is speeding up the entire process from a very first interview until the presentation of that candidate to a potential company. So how did I approach that project? First, it was all about understanding the client's process, the structure of his reports, and also the exact language he uses. That in English and also German, as it is a German company. You see also here, same process. The very first step is always understanding your client, understanding the situation, understanding the data. So this is the foundation of everything that follows. In step number 2, it was all about developing a prompt that can recreate the report style of my client as close as possible, because in the past they wrote the reports manually, and now we had to teach an AI to copy this style as close as possible. And all that happened in the second stage of the process. After that, we had several feedback rounds to finalize the prompt. And then in step number 4, I built an entire web application so that the entire organization can use the tool, including a password login, the storing of the reports on a server, and the automated transfer into the client's design of the reports. So you see, this was actually quite a lot, and I built it with the same tech stack that I also showed you in the very first example project of the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. The only thing that was more advanced in that project was that there was also a password login and that we just had more data involved. But besides to that, I built it the exact same way as we also built the yard configurator within the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. All right, so let's have a look at the workflows. You see, in this case, there were 4 workflows involved. It was always a workflow responsible for the initial creation of a report, and afterwards a second workflow responsible for the finalization and the editing of the report if a user is not satisfied yet. And that part is also transforming the report into the client's design. And as there were 2 different kind of reports, we had to create the entire thing 2 times with slight differences. But also here you see that I applied the same nice, clean and organized structure. And this is something that I just always do because it helps me to better understand my own project, and also it looks just so much better if you present something like that to a client. All right, that's it for day number 18 of the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. Today I wanted to give you a first insight into real client projects that I built with the exact same methods that I teach within the 30-day AI Automation Pro Challenge. Tomorrow I will share with you my most important learnings from my very first real projects so that you have these insights available from the very beginning. And then at day number 20, I will show you how you get your very first customer. So stay tuned and we see us tomorrow at day number 19.